Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Asiri. I'm founder and CEO of Executive Presence. We help leaders build visibility and credibility as thought leaders on LinkedIn. We worked with over 400 executives, and a significant portion of our work is in healthcare, software, services, devices, health tech. So today I wanted to talk about an advantage I've observed that healthcare organizations have on LinkedIn that very few of them are using. And I'll share data from 4 of my healthcare leader clients to still illustrate key points about how exactly to do it. Here's what we will cover today. First, the untapped advantage, why healthcare organizations are uniquely positioned for LinkedIn and why almost none are capitalizing on it. Second, I'm going to share 4 case studies with real data from a 50-person medical device startup all the way to a 3,000-person healthcare services company. All of those are going to be anonymized, but we'll go into a lot of detail on the data. Third, pulling that all together, we'll talk about a repeatable playbook that you can use, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. I will make sure I reserve at least 10 minutes to answer questions, so feel free to start populating the Q&A tab in the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to that at the very end. Quick background on me. I spent 5 years as a junior officer on nuclear submarines in the Navy. After the military, I earned my MBA at Stanford. Since then, I founded 3 companies, 2 of which I've sold, one of which is my current one, Executive Presence, where I help senior leaders from Series A through public companies shape how the company is perceived by the public. We do that primarily through executive thought leadership on LinkedIn. And a lot of that work, as I said, has been done in the healthcare space, which is why I'm excited about today's presentation. Here is the reality. Most healthcare organizations have playbooks for clinical operations. They have playbooks for reimbursement. They have playbooks for regulations. They have a playbook for talent acquisition. They've got a playbook for sales, but almost none of these organizations have a playbook for leadership visibility. And I think that's a huge problem because your leaders are your most powerful growth lever, and most of them are invisible online. Here is what to me makes healthcare so different from every other industry that we work with. And this is the insight that really fundamentally changed how I think about the healthcare space. Healthcare organizations are built on 2 things that absolutely dominate LinkedIn, and almost none of you are using these. And I'll go through them one at a time, but they are mission and people. So the first is mission. Healthcare exists to improve lives. And that why, the reason behind why your organization exists, is the most powerful content on LinkedIn. Across every executive we've studied, every executive we've worked with, mission-driven content outperforms product content by 2 to 3x. And healthcare companies have that mission baked into their DNA. You don't have to manufacture it. It's already there and it's already part of your culture. The second one is people, your clinicians, your team, your patient stories. LinkedIn rewards human-centric content above everything else, and healthcare organizations tend to have more human stories than any other industry that I've worked with. The nurse who went above and beyond, the researcher who had a breakthrough, the patient whose life changed. These stories are sitting in your organization right now, and nobody is telling them on LinkedIn. Instead, most healthcare leaders default to resharing press releases and company announcements, which across every executive we've worked with is the lowest performing content category. That promotional salesy content doesn't do well on LinkedIn. The mission and the people are right there. You're just not using them. And this matters a lot in healthcare because healthcare is built ultimately on trust. Trust is the ultimate currency in healthcare. Perception shapes who gets trusted, who gets believed, who gets chosen long before a contract, a hire, or a partnership is on the table. Think about it across 4 different dimensions. Customers, healthcare systems, and health plans evaluate leadership credibility before signing contracts. In fact, the whole buyer journey has changed, as you know. And before people even reach out, they're doing their research. And part of that is who's leading the organization. Talent, clinicians, engineers, executives, research people, the leadership, they do their due diligence on leadership teams before accepting offers, especially in a talent shortage. They want to know who they're working for. They want to know what your culture is like. They want to know what drives the actual organization. Third one is investors and acquirers. Perception shapes confidence and it also shapes valuation. And then finally, the internal stakeholders. Belief drives alignment and performance. The best company, sadly, doesn't always win. The best perceived one does. And perception is shaped by who shows up. So why this matters now, I see three structural forces converging right now that make this more urgent than ever. We've known this for 4 years. The first is your CEO or CMO is not the only leader being evaluated. Depending on your organization, that could be the chief revenue officer, the chief clinical officer, it could be a VP of sales, it could be your CHRO. There are many people that are being looked at and evaluated prior to the first conversation occurring. And most healthcare organizations have zero strategy for any of these people. Second, and I hear this from prospects all the time, your competitors' leaders are getting louder. The leadership team that owns the narrative wins the contract, the clinician, and that partnership. And then third, silence is now a signal. Buyers, candidates, board members, acquirers, journalists, they are all on LinkedIn. And when they search for your leaders and find nothing, that isn't neutral. It's actually negative. It creates doubt. And so this shows up in 4 areas that matter to every single person here today. And I have coincidentally, case studies to coincide with these, but it does impact your exits. A visible leadership team de-risks the acquisition and it de-risks the transition. Acquirers want to know that leaders can retain customers, clinicians, and referral relationships after the close. Second, talent. This is a big one for many of you, I know. The number one constraint in many healthcare organizations is talent, not demand. And so top clinicians, top executives, they are researching leadership before they'll even take the call. Third is pipeline. Health system buyers, payer procurement teams, and GPO partners form opinions about your leadership before the first meeting. And then lastly, and this one's a little bit more broadly, the market position. The less experienced competitor whose leader owns the narrative in your space is going to win the deals that you should be winning. So before I get into the case studies, I do want to share what I've seen across 400 executives because there is a pattern in what doesn't work that matters as much as what does. So one mistake I see very commonly is resharing isn't visibility. And by resharing, I mean on LinkedIn, you can post an original thought or you can take a post from your company or from someone else and reshare it. And we're actually releasing next week or in the next 2 weeks our annual LinkedIn report. I think the number is 1/10. You get 1/10 of visibility when you share content versus when you post something original. But the default for almost every executive, if they're active on LinkedIn, is just to share content. It's pretty easy. My company posted this. Let me just reshare it. It doesn't work. Reposting your company's press release is not building a voice. Original perspective is the only currency that compounds on LinkedIn. Mistake number 2, this one's my number 1 pet peeve. So humbled to be featured. It's not a strategy. It's very generic. That's what everyone does. Company promotion alone is the lowest performing content category every time across every executive and every industry we work with. You have to be more original than that. And then what actually does work is shaping your industry out loud. Leaders creating categories can't do it behind the scenes. Educating the market, defining the narrative, that has to happen in public. And I do, as an aside, want to acknowledge how hard that is. It is almost everyone I work with says the same thing. They would rather just build in private. They would rather let the work speak for themselves. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They don't want that scrutiny. But the people we work with choose to tolerate that discomfort because it has an outsized impact on their organization, because it serves their clients, their team, their organization to do so. And so I do want to name this. This is not something that anyone I work with really wants to do. Almost universally, it is unpleasant to put yourself out there. It's unpleasant to have a great post that just falls flat because competing news cycles or whatever's going on that day, you have to have a certain amount of thick skin. We can help you get there, but I just want to normalize that this is not something that most people naturally flock to. 99% of the people I've ever worked with on this, they would rather not do this, but they're doing it because they realize how vital it is to their organization. Okay, let's get into the evidence. 4 healthcare leaders I've worked with, 4 different segments. I've had to anonymize this, obviously. But what I love about this is that the playbook we're going to talk about, it does scale from a 50-person medical device startup to a 3,000-person healthcare services company. We're going to go through these one at a time, but at a high level, we'll talk about the Exit, a healthcare software company, about 850 employees. They were acquired for over $2 billion. The Recruiter, chief clinical officer at a healthcare services company. They've got about 3,000 employees. He grew headcount by 26% during a talent crisis. And his recruiting department literally told him, your LinkedIn is our #1 channel for recruiting people. We'll talk about the Evangelist, a healthtech CEO with about 1,000 employees who built trust at scale by leading with mission instead of product. And then lastly, the Innovator, a medical device founder with about 50 employees who turned sporadic posting into a consistent leadership narrative. We'll go one by one. And please do put in the Q&A as you have questions, and we'll get to them shortly, right after this. So the Exit. This is our first case study. Now, this is a private equity-backed healthcare software company, almost 1,000 employees. They're backed by PE firms with over $100 billion in combined assets under management. The CEO had deep domain expertise in healthcare IT. He was actually brought in by the sponsors to scale the company and ultimately exit it. He had done that previously multiple times. Very impressive human being, but virtually no digital presence. When we started working together, we started by Googling him. There was really nothing besides his company bio. He had posted on LinkedIn maybe 5 times in the last year. Minimal traction. The post didn't really do well. And there wasn't really anything digitally to point to how credible he was. So you've got a CEO perfectly positioned for a landmark exit, but when anyone looked him up, they found nothing. Here is what changed. Because 18 months later, we got him posting 20 times a month. That's a lot of volume, about 240 posts a year. His top posts were pulling in over 400 likes. That translates to almost 1 million views. He went from invisible to a recognized voice in healthcare IT. And his company was acquired by a Fortune 500 company for over $2 billion. Now, when the acquirer's diligence team Googled him, they found a thought leader. They did not find a ghost. They found a LinkedIn narrative that became part of the acquisition story. And the key insight here in this case study is that visibility isn't built the moment of exit. It's built the 24 months before anyone knows the exit is coming. I see this all the time. A healthcare CEO comes to us right before a big announcement, but you can't build an audience at the moment you need this one. The runway really has to be laid first. And so I want to reiterate, LinkedIn is a compound game. The best time to start was 24 months ago before you needed the spotlight, but the next best time is today. And I do hope that you leave today with either for yourself or for your leadership team, really emboldened to start going soon, even if imperfectly, because it is a compound game. And one of the things that we'll talk about, and I think that no one realizes this with LinkedIn, is how it can become this heat-seeking missile, how you can start posting, and then after about 90 days, you can start to see, look, when I talk about topics A, B, and C, no one really cares. But when I talk about X, Y, and Z, people really lean in. And that's the beauty of LinkedIn. You can literally see for the titles and industries and geographies and company sizes that you're going after, which messages land and which don't, which allows you, if you can start soon, it allows you to start to have the data to understand where people value you and you can take that information beyond just LinkedIn to your broader go-to-market strategy with messaging. One last detail about this leader before we move on to the next case study. One thing I really admire about this leader, he's an incredibly charismatic leader, very effective. No surprise that he achieved this outcome. One of his primary reasons for using LinkedIn was for his internal team members. 850 employees all across the country. He wanted to make sure they knew the mission and the vision and where they were going. He wanted to make sure that they were encouraged and that he was championing them and what they were doing. He wanted to make sure that everyone knew who he was, what he stood for, and where he was leading the organization. Not for his ego, but to make sure that they were enrolled and bought in. And I think that's a beautiful way to use LinkedIn. And I also want to obviously say he wasn't just doing LinkedIn. He was doing town halls. He was doing Slack messages, but this was a very essential part of the portfolio of what he was doing. Moving on, second case study, the recruiter. This one is really important for those of you in the room who are struggling with talent right now. This is a great story because this is a chief clinical officer at a private equity-backed national healthcare services organization. Now they've got about 3,000 employees. They operate in a therapeutic space where there is a nationwide shortage of qualified clinicians. Their traditional recruiting channels were failing, and more job postings were not going to be the answer. So they tried something completely different. They made the leader visible. Their chief clinical officer's posting frequency went up 619%. That means about 2 posts a month. To 12 posts a month over this 47-month program we've done with him. His average engagement more than doubled, and in our time working together, we've generated over 500 original posts. But here's the only number that matters on this slide. They grew their headcount by over 26%, from about 2,300 employees to about 3,000 employees, and that is amidst this backdrop of this industry-wide talent crisis. I would like to use this case study to illustrate one point that you should all know about how important it is to have a portfolio of content on LinkedIn. And after the fourth case study, we'll break down that portfolio that you could apply today. But in this case, I wanted to go through the numbers because, so just to kind of orient you here, we group content into 4 categories: leadership and career journey, industry thought leadership, work adjacent content, company promotion. So that's what you're seeing here, along with the average likes that those posts got for this particular executive. What you will see here is that company promotion, and that is what most leaders default to. I'm so humbled to be recognized. I'm so honored that or I'm hiring or doing a webinar. That's where people default, and that is the lowest performing content category. And that's not just for this executive. That's consistent across everyone we work with. And so instead, their best performing content was their personal and their leadership stories about why they're in this line of work, why they're so proud to be working with specific team members, mistakes they've made as a leader, and how they've learned from that. Generally, the more vulnerable and authentic, the better the story performs. And company promotion, the thing most healthcare leaders default to, was the lowest performing category. Personal and leadership content drove twice the engagement. So remember what I said about healthcare being people-centric? This is one of the proofs. The people stories outperform the company stories every time. And I want to just kind of give some personal context here because I really admire this leader. One of the things I think they did really well in this leadership and career journey bucket is they're very reflective. They're very open and honest about where they were struggling as a leader, the culture they were striving to build, how he was trying to support his team, how he was owning up to his mistakes with his team. It was authentic to who he is. I'm not pitching this as a general strategy you should use. It needs to be authentic to who you are. But that vulnerability really showcased his culture and what he was building better than anything else he could have ever done. The people that go to work for him realize that is a leader I want to work with, someone who's very humble, who's very obviously advocating for his people and going to bat for them. It really became a magnet for them. And LinkedIn became the company's best recruiting billboard. This executive didn't have to ask anyone to apply. And I think that's really, really powerful illustration of how this works when it's done well. All right. Keep the questions coming in the chat pane. We'll get to that at the very end here. I'll keep things moving because I know you're all busy. Third case study I like to call the evangelist. In this case, our client is the CEO and co-founder of a global health tech company. They have about 1,000 employees across 10 different countries, and they are on a mission to make care accessible to everyone. And they do that by destigmatizing an underserved condition and making treatment dramatically easier. When we started to work together, their product was strong, the mission was compelling, but the primary problem was that nobody outside of the company was hearing that compelling story. In terms of LinkedIn, when we started to work together, their CEO was posting about twice a month, and it was largely inconsistent and not really thought out. There's pretty much no strategy in place. Now, in under a year, we got his posting frequency up about 3.5x. That translates to about 82 original posts built from the scratch in a year. And here's the healthcare specific insight. His team and culture posts, stories of the people behind the mission, outperformed every other content category. That's an average of 82 likes, which is higher than their industry commentary. It was also higher than their product-related content, their company-related posts. The people stories and culture posts outperformed all other content categories. His top posts tell the story. Here's some of the best posts. His founder origin story, telling the story of falling in love with the problem, was his best post. A story about a major company milestone, their company anniversary, was second. And then another story about a major milestone, their 1 millionth patient served, was his third post. Notice what's not on the list: product specs, feature announcements, tech capabilities, being featured in a magazine or at a conference. The best healthcare content never leads with the product. It does lead with the mission, and it lets the audience connect the dots. That's what I mean when I say healthcare has a natural advantage. The mission is the content. You don't have to manufacture it. Now, one just quick thing here. You'll notice I said story on all three of those. I think for LinkedIn, story is the bacon that you can wrap around anything and it'll go down easier. If you can wrap something in a story, people relate to it, they consume it, it goes further. So it's all about the story. Well, do the last case study here, the innovator. So I saved this one for last because I think it really proves the playbook scales all the way down. In this case, our client is the founder and CEO of a medical device company. They have about 50 employees. Their CEO is a military veteran and Purple Heart recipient, which he was awarded when he sustained a spinal cord injury in combat. That experience led him to found a company that builds devices to improve outcomes for patients with similar conditions. Now, this is the most compelling founder story in our entire client base. His personal content regularly gets thousands of likes. There are just so many people who resonate with his story, with his resilience, his purpose, his mission. But here's the problem. He was posting sporadically. Some posts, there would be a flood of content, 13 posts in a single month, and then months of silence. He had the engagement. He just didn't have the consistency. And so since we started working together about 7 months ago, we've doubled his posting frequency and we've eliminated any and all of those gaps in his online visibility. His posts are consistently getting 21% more engagement. And that's a consistent finding we see. If the content is good, even if you post more frequently, you get more engagement, not less. It's a little bit counterintuitive. You think that if you're posting more often, the engagement falls off. If you have really great content, that's not true. But here's the data point that matters most. His personal and his resilient stories, content about his military service, his injury, his journey as a founder, averages 441 likes. That's 2.5 times his business content. In healthcare, your why is really your most powerful asset. His top post, the first time his son saw him stand and walk, over 3,000 likes. His 9-year injury anniversary, 2,700 likes. A gratitude reflection, 759 likes. This is the 50-person company seeing the same compound effect as a 3,000-person company. The framework doesn't require scale. It just requires consistency, and consistency turns sporadic viral moments into a sustained leadership narrative. Now, before I show you the pattern in the framework, I want to pause on something because across all 4 case studies, the same healthcare-specific insights emerged. First, mission outperforms product by 2 to 3x. Every healthcare leader's highest performing content told the story of why they exist, not what they sell. The exit CEO's top posts were industry perspective, not product demos. The evangelist top posts were mission driven. The innovators top posts were personal resilience. None of them led with product. Second, product content is the number one recruiting tool. In an industry where talent is the bottleneck, team spotlights and culture stories outperform "we're hiring" posts in every case. The recruiter provided this at scale, 26% headcount growth. The number one source of their recruiting effort was his LinkedIn. But the evangelist shows that same exact pattern with team and culture posts um, work outperforming everything else. And then third, the pattern scales from 50 to 3,000 employees, a 50-person medical device startup and a 3,000-person healthcare services company saw the same compound curve with the same framework. You don't need 1,000 employees to make this work. So let me put this side by side. Healthcare software, 850 employees from 5 posts a year to 20 posts a month, $2 billion exit 2 years later. Healthcare services, 3,000 employees from 2 posts a month to 12, 26% headcount growth, 3.5 years. HealthTech, 1,000 employees from 2 posts a month to 7, mission-driven trust at scale, 18 months. Medical devices, 50 employees from sporadic to sustained, consistent leadership narrative, 7 months. This is the exact same framework for healthcare segments from 50 to 3,000 employees, all absolutely repeatable. So here is the framework for content categories. Industry thought leadership. Now, like I said, this is a heat-seeking missile. So over time, you're going to get a feel for what the exact match is for you. In general, when I work with a healthcare executive, what I say is, look, we're going to start with 40% of your content being industry thought leadership. That's about 4 out of 10 posts. This is your credibility base, your point of view on where healthcare is going. The way that I generally ask an executive to figure out what this is, I say, look, you got 10,000 of your target audience members in an auditorium to hear you give a 1-hour keynote. And before you get up on stage, they say, if you mention your product or your company, we're yanking the mic. What do you talk about? What I'm trying to solve for in this is this Venn diagram of their subject matter expertise, the things that they can speak about with authority. And then the other circle is, what does their target audience care about? This is where empathy comes in. What keeps them up at night? What do they really want to know? What would help them do their job better or make them better? You really want to live at the intersection of those two. That's where we're exploring for industry thought leadership. The second category is what we call leadership and career journey. Again, as a generic template, I would say 30%, 3 out of 10 posts I would do is this. This is the trust builder. This is your story, your failures, what you've learned. Now, most executives we work with, they have done many things prior to their current role. This is where we want to peel the curtain back. What did they learn in college that impacts how they show up today? What's a mistake they made earlier in their career that made them into who they are and shows who they are? Stories work great, which is why this category works really well. But we're really trying to find a lot of the origin stories that show who they are as a leader today. And in the case of the recruiter, I talked about how he shared a lot of stories from his daily leadership. Man, I had this meeting with my team yesterday. I just completely botched it, but this is what I took away. Vulnerability works really well here, but this makes you really relatable. Company promotion, 20% or less. Most executives, this is 100% of their content. Team wins, milestones, culture, recruiting ads that don't look like recruiting ads. This is really where that bacon story metaphor really plays. You really want to have a story here. Not we're so humbled, we're so honored. You want to wrap everything in a story. Peel back the curtain. Who made that possible? What made that possible? What did you learn? That's really what makes that land more. And then last one, work adjacent, personal. It's about 10%, 1 out of 10. Your values, your family, your life outside of the company. This is really the reach multiplier across all of our clients. This is always the highest performing category. You do it sparingly, but it makes you 3-dimensional. It makes you relatable. It really, especially with images making such a big difference with content, it really makes it go further. And the question I usually ask here is the dinner party test, because this is not the same for everyone. And I say, look, if you had a dinner party and around the table are prospective hires, key hires, and prospective investors and prospective partners and customers, what do you talk about over drinks that's not talking shop? And that generally helps. Like, do you talk politics? Do you not? Do you talk about your kids? Do you not? Do you talk about travel? Do you not? Do you talk about sports? Do you not? It really is different for everyone, but that tends to be the litmus test on what to talk about. Oh, I saw one of the questions, and we'll get to these in a second, but one of the questions was on content mix. Is this articles? What are you sharing? Again, we'll send out our data report here in 2 weeks. Generally, image is and text is the best. Yeah, and by image I mean a photo that's original and relevant, not AI generated, not stock, an actual photo. You don't have to be in it, but photos do so well. I'm not talking about graphics or things that are manufactured. That's generally the top performing content. Right next to it is video. Video is great. I think that LinkedIn is really prioritizing video, significantly more work to produce it, which is why we generally default to photos and text. But what I think is not captured in the calculus is the relationship building value of video. Seeing you, hearing you, getting a feel for you, building that relationship, making them feel like they know you, maybe a little bit of brand enhancement of like, okay, that's a video. The company's, it generally is perceived as harder to do, so there might be some brand enhancement. But video, I think, is often up there. Text does great. Carousels or documents, which are those little slideshows, that's continuing to perform worse over time. It seems like, there was a time when polls were all the rage on LinkedIn, and then they just, really stopped working. We're seeing that with carousels. Articles, generally, we don't see working well, especially if you drive people off platform. Even though LinkedIn doesn't claim that they're going to penalize you, from our data, it seems like you are penalized for driving traffic away from LinkedIn. Newsletters have a place. We can talk about that in the Q&A. But for posts, I would say generally text with photos, text or video are the way to go. I think one thing that makes healthcare unique is you have a natural advantage in 3 of these 4 categories. Your mission fuels the industry thought leadership. Your people fuel the leadership and career journey one. Your patients' lives could fuel the work adjacent one. The only category that really requires effort is company promotion, and that's the lowest performing one anyway. So one last thing before we get into the recap. It compounds. LinkedIn is a compound game. Platforms, apologies, every healthcare leader who quits too early. Here's the pattern I see repeatedly. Month 1, we think that LinkedIn is kind of like putting their thumb on the scale and gives you a lot of visibility when you first start posting. So month 1 is this huge dopamine hit. Lots of positive signal from your early activity. Months 2 to 3 is when the trouble starts, because that drops off. That algorithmic advantage goes away. So you start to feel like nothing's happening. The likes are low. Most leaders tend to give up at this point. Months 4 through 6 is when you'll start to get your first, hey, I saw your post. You'll start to get a text from someone you haven't heard from in a while. Guess where they were reminded you exist? People will start to meet with you and they might mention your content. And side note, they will have never liked or commented your content. You would have no way of knowing that they even saw your post unless they told you. But this is where the qualitative observations start to show that this is working beyond what you see in your LinkedIn analytics. And often at this point, you start to see a small trickle of inbounds, whether that's employee candidates, sales, partnerships, media. Months 6 through 12 is really when it starts to shift. This is when the narrative changes. This is when you start to attract people who value your insight, start to get net new followers. And then year 2 and beyond is really where the compounding takes in. The flywheel is spinning. Every post lands harder. The audience was built before the moment you needed it. All 4 healthcare studies show the same curve. The flywheel does take time, but it doesn't stop. Okay, we'll open it up for Q&A in just a second, so throw your questions in the chat pane. First, let me bring it all home. Today, we talked about 4 healthcare leaders who used one repeatable framework. There were measurable outcomes across exits, recruiting, trust building, and brand. There was the healthcare software CEO with 850 employees who went from invisible to 240 posts a year, and ultimately, that was part of the $2 billion acquisition. There was the healthcare services chief clinical officer who grew his headcount by 20 26% during a clinician talent crisis. There is the health tech CEO with 1,000 employees where mission-driven content built trust at scale. That was one on the heels of a 3.5x increase in posting frequency. And then there was the medical device founder with 50 employees. He went from sporadic to sustained, same playbook, any scale. Leadership visibility isn't a marketing expense. It is the lever healthcare organizations are uniquely built to pull, and almost none of them do. So thank you for listening. We'll go into the Q&A now. I do want to say if any of this resonated with you, executivepresence.io, fill out a contact us form. I'll send the replay of this video, reply to that with your questions. Let me know if you want to meet. You can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Nassiri, any of those ways. I would love to speak with you if you want me to weigh in on your specific challenges that you're facing and how we might support you. So we'll open up to the Q&A now.